Stop, right now. Pause the endless cycle of trying to decode every text message, every half-hearted gesture, every elusive response. Instead of pouring your precious mental energy into figuring him out, direct that spotlight inward. The most powerful transformation happens the moment you decide to invest your time, heart, and soul into your own growth, even if it means going silent. Silence isn't weakness. In fact, it's a strategic advantage. Our modern world celebrates loud voices and showy displays of affection or wealth. Yet the strongest women I've encountered are the ones who don't scramble for attention. They are silent architects of their own destiny, fiercely building a life of independence and self-worth, undeterred by the shifting opinions of others. Those who misunderstand silence as passivity haven't truly grasped the concept of inner fortitude. Picture this. You're seated in your favorite cafe, sipping a latte, calmly reading or working while a whirlwind of social drama unfolds around you. Friends keep nudging you, curious why you're not as visibly upset or anxious about your relationship status as they are about theirs. Meanwhile, texts and social media updates try to hijack your thoughts, yet you remain centered, unhurried, and composed. That quiet confidence, rooted in your decision to protect your own peace, will make people stop and notice. Silence, in this context, is your declaration of self-respect. It's a refusal to let external chaos dictate your internal state. Psychologists have long pointed out how focusing on external validation can corrode self-esteem. The more we seek other people's approval, especially from that one special guy, the more we feed a cycle of dependency that can tear down our well-being. By training yourself to remain calm instead of clamoring for reassurance, you tap into an often overlooked superpower. Studies suggest that mindful self-focus alleviates anxiety and fosters resilience. When you choose silence over frantic explanation or emotional outburst, you're effectively saying, "My sense of worth isn't up for public debate." But let's be clear, choosing silence doesn't mean erasing your opinions or desires. It's about selectively sharing them. High-value women understand that not everything requires a reaction, especially in the heat of the moment. Take a simple disagreement in a relationship. The standard script might be to argue at length, defend your stance, or over-explain to win the discussion. But imagine taking a breath, offering a calm, concise statement of your view, and then stepping back. The absence of endless justification can be more impactful than any tirade. It shows you're secure enough in your stance that you don't need external applause or validation. Silence also creates space for self-discovery. When you're no longer fixated on his every move, you have the mental bandwidth to chase your own passions, refine your ambitions, and build emotional fortitude. Think of your mind like prime real estate. Fill it with plans to advance your career, cultivate friendships that uplift you, or dive into hobbies that recharge your spirit. Each of these elements is another building block of your high-value identity. And ironically, the more you engage with your own life, the more magnetic you become. People, yes, even the men you used to stress about, are drawn to someone who radiates self-possession and quiet confidence. Cultural norms might whisper that staying silent could be read as losing interest or lacking warmth. That's a misconception. Genuine warmth doesn't vanish just because you prioritize your own space. Instead, it flourishes when it's offered authentically, on your terms, from a place of balance rather than desperation. The silence we're talking about here is a deliberate choice to stop pouring energy into trivial pursuits and questionable motives. But silence alone isn't enough. You've got to pair it with decisive, intentional action directed at your own growth. Ask yourself, where am I spending my energy? If hours slip away scrolling through his Instagram stories or revisiting text threads in search of hidden meanings, that's a clear indicator that you're off-center. Reclaim that energy and channel it into pursuits that nurture you, whether it's perfecting a work project, rediscovering a favorite hobby, or hitting the gym to reconnect with your body. This redirection doesn't just keep your mind healthy, it cultivates a quiet, magnetic confidence that radiates from the inside out. Here's a practical example. Let's say he's been distant. Instead of sending a follow-up text, "Hey, did you see my message?" or spiraling into anxiety, "He must be losing interest." Harness that impulse and transmute it into something constructive. Could you use that time to research a new travel destination you've always dreamed of? Maybe you try out a yoga class or network with a group of ambitious women in your city. You'd be surprised at how these seemingly small redirections reinforce your sense of independence and elevate your mood far more effectively than waiting on his response ever could. Emphasizing silence and self-focus can sound abstract. So let's break it down with a behavioral tool psychologists call stimulus control. Essentially, you control the triggers that lead you to ruminate about him. Maybe it's turning off social media notifications after 7 p.m., or resisting the urge to check your phone first thing in the morning. By modifying your environment to minimize these triggers, you're signaling to your subconscious that your focus has shifted. You're no longer in a state of endless emotional availability. Instead, you're safeguarding your mental real estate for things that genuinely matter. Another angle to consider is how silence can serve as an emotional detox. Constant dialogue, especially around relationship drama, can cloud your judgment. When you quiet the noise, patterns become visible. You start recognizing the recurring themes that keep you stuck in less than fulfilling cycles. Maybe you realize you've repeatedly tolerated disrespect or minimized your own needs to keep the peace. Once you see these patterns clearly, you can break them decisively. Silence acts like a mirror, reflecting the truths you might have overlooked in the clamor of back-and-forth chatter. Don't underestimate how challenging this journey can be. The urge to fill silence with explanations or to chase validation is strong, particularly in a culture that equates attention with worth. Friends might pressure you to speak up or make a move, believing that direct confrontation is the only path to resolution. But resolution isn't your highest goal. Your inner growth is. Choosing to stay silent in certain moments is an act of self-preservation, and that's a stance worth defending. After all, you're not ignoring reality. You're simply prioritizing your well-being over fleeting emotional drama. People around you may not immediately understand this transformation. Some might label it aloof or distant because they're used to a version of you that was always available, always ready to soothe their egos or confirm their expectations. But watch what happens when you remain graciously detached. The relationships that truly matter will deepen in respect and authenticity. Those built on superficial neediness will naturally drift away, making space for healthier connections. This pivot towards silence also demands a reevaluation of your social circle. If you're surrounded by friends who thrive on relationship gossip, the temptation to discuss every detail is almost unavoidable. You might need to limit those interactions or steer conversations toward more meaningful, growth-oriented topics. That doesn't mean you shut people out. It means you actively choose dynamics that reinforce your new, high-value mindset. And let's be honest, there's a certain thrill in realizing you don't have to be everyone's emotional caretaker. Sometimes, in focusing so heavily on him or on other people's needs, you neglect your own potential. Imagine the heights you could reach if you reclaimed every ounce of energy you've lost to overthinking his texts or analyzing whether he's truly the one. That energy could fuel a new business venture, a creative project, a fitness transformation, anything that feeds your soul and propels you forward. By channeling your focus inward, you also become more emotionally available to yourself. You can better identify what you truly want, what you won't tolerate, and where you draw the line. This internal clarity reduces the likelihood of settling for mediocre attention or half-hearted affection. Once you solidify your standards, both in how you treat yourself and how you expect to be treated, your silence resonates as power, not passivity. When you do speak, your words carry weight, because people know you're not just talking for the sake of talking. The most transformative aspect of this approach is how it fuels your self-esteem and sense of agency. Once you stop letting his whims dictate your state of mind, you'll realize just how much influence you truly have over your choices, your emotional landscape, and ultimately, your life's direction. This shift is profound. Instead of riding the roller coaster of external approval, you anchor yourself in a steady place of self-validation. You become what modern psychology calls internally referenced. Your sense of worth arises from within, rather than being at the mercy of shifting social cues. This recalibration changes the way you handle disagreements or heated conversations. Instead of trying to steer every interaction to your favor, you learn to pick your battles. Silence in such a moment isn't submission, it's discernment. You're choosing not to fan the flames of conflict or engage with someone who isn't listening in good faith. Meanwhile, you preserve your mental clarity for situations that genuinely call for your voice. It's a subtle but powerful way of establishing boundaries. No fanfare, no drawn-out monologues, just a simple refusal to lend your energy to chaos. Over time, you'll also notice a ripple effect on your mood and overall emotional health. By prioritizing your own peace, you reduce stress hormones in your body, a benefit widely backed by stress management research. Chronic stress has a sneaky way of creeping into your relationships, your work performance, and even your self-image. When you stay silent instead of escalating unnecessary drama, you're effectively practicing emotional regulation. This skill makes you a more composed partner, friend, colleague, and most importantly, a more balanced human being. As you become more intentional about where your energy goes, you'll discover that certain people, maybe even him, are no longer a central focus. Does that mean you're cutting them out entirely? Not necessarily. It just means they're not your primary concern. If he notices your emotional detachment, he might try to provoke a reaction to confirm he still matters. This is where your resolve faces a test. Should you respond or maintain your newfound distance? In many cases, the most empowering choice is to remain quiet, to communicate by your silence that you're no longer playing the old game of emotional tug-of-war. You see, the greatest paradox is that silence often says more than words ever could. It conveys self-assurance, that you don't need external permission to live authentically. It shows emotional maturity. You're willing to engage only when it's constructive. And it highlights your shift from external to internal validation. You're no longer chasing illusions of security in someone else's acceptance. You've become the source of your own stability. But don't confuse this approach with never speaking up at all. Silence has its place, but so does voicing your truth. The difference is that you'll speak from a place of calm conviction instead of frantic insecurity. You'll share your boundaries and desires without feeling you must persuade or impress anyone. When you do decide to open up, the words carry weight because they're chosen, not blurted out in reaction. This is the beauty of a balanced stance. You're neither doormat nor dictator. You're simply a woman with clarity, poise, and command over her own narrative. The final piece of this transformation is learning to sustain it. Initially, you might worry that focusing on yourself feels self-centered. But remember, self-care is not selfish. It's an investment in your longevity and well-being. By reinforcing your emotional core, you show up as a healthier presence in all your relationships. This allows you to give from a place of abundance rather than running on empty. Paradoxically, detachment strengthens the connections that matter because you're bringing a whole, thriving version of yourself to the table. If you ever feel tempted to slip back into old habits, spiraling into over-analysis or chasing his attention, remind yourself of the bigger picture. Your life goals, emotional health, and personal fulfillment can't hinge on someone else's moods. Recite a personal mantra if necessary. My energy is sacred. I choose to spend it wisely. That one line alone can be a powerful mental checkpoint whenever you feel the urge to stray from your path. And finally, don't be afraid to spark a revolution of silence within your friend circle. You may be surprised to find that many of your friends are also exhausted by endless drama. Talk about how freeing it is to shift the spotlight inward. Encourage them to try it for themselves. Disruption starts when one person dares to question the status quo of emotional dependency. As more women embrace this approach, the entire conversation around self-worth and relationships evolves. This is your invitation to rewrite the script you've been living by. One that likely had you obsess over every text, sacrifice your ambitions, or lose sleep worrying about how you're perceived. By stepping into silence, you reclaim the narrative. By focusing on yourself, you ascend to a higher form of self-respect. In this place, you're no longer a character in someone else's storyline. You're the author of your own. And once you taste that kind of power, you'll wonder how you ever settled for less.